The microphone hissed when my name was called. I didn't have a speech prepared. The silver letters COLEGIO Municipal Dr. OSWALDO glowed above the stage, and under those final bright yellow lights I walked up shaking, expecting applause from parents packed into school benches, the smell of old varnished wood and cheap perfume thick in the gymnasium. Everything felt loud. I clutched my folded paper, but the world seemed intent on drowning me out. I looked for my mother's face among the rows of people, saw her mouthing "Vi" with eyes wide, willing me to speak. I opened my mouth to talk about dreams, about wanting to write, about how living by the beach in Flamingo and wandering Lapa at dusk had filled me with stories since I was 12. But as soon as I outlined the first line, "I want to be a novelist," to show Rihu's heart in words, a snort cut through the audience. It came from my uncle Jorge, who regularly smacked the backs of others' heads at family barbecues for announcing intentions grander than his own. This time his laughter set off a ripple. I saw my cousin Leandro nudge his brother, both grinning, then more in the crowd tilting their heads in amusement. The applause, when it came, was polite and thin. Later I heard what people said. "Icute brincadeira Renee, writer como assim vivera mendigo," that was Aunt Fatima. "Now quer trabalhar esse garoto," from the family mechanic Paulo, "vai viva de fantasia." Even my mother, fierce as she was, padded around their words, pressing her worries into the soft fold of my arm as we walked home. "Filho e vocia tenta engenharia, medicina so pra garantia." I wanted to comfort her, but every conversation turned into a negotiation about how possible it was to make a living writing novels in a city where selling sweets on the sidewalk meant survival for so many. Their doubt became a flickering film loop in my head. My anger then was sharp and young. I wanted to shout to prove them all wrong, but mostly I wanted out. That feeling, hands digging into fists, jaw set hard. But I smiled anyway, because everything in Rio teaches you that the mask of Allegria is how you navigate the world. After graduation, I found myself with hours to fill, long walks along Avenida Atlantica, sand stuck between my toes, milling through the bustle of kiosks selling mate gelato. My notebooks filled with stories no one read but me. I worked every small job I could get, scrubbing tables at the corner bar in Flamingo, hauling crates for the Ferrantes in Gloria, polishing cars, anything that left enough energy to write at night. Each rejection letter from some literary magazine or contest felt heavier than the last, drifting in with the same refrain, "Thank you, but." At home, money tightened like a belt. My older brother Roberto brought in enough with construction shifts, and my mother ironed shirts for a local chain of boutiques. They never said it outright, but the glances multiplied, sometimes sympathy, sometimes that flicker of "see, this is reality." I tried not to care, plunging deeper into stories about boys on hills overlooking Rio, chasing seagulls, listening to the hum of the city at night. The years passed. I published short pieces online under pseudonyms. No one noticed. My anger calcified. I wore it as armor. Neighbors began asking if I'd go to university, if maybe I'd thought about teaching. "Writing is for those born rich," said the landlady Dona Carmen, peering over her glasses as I thumbed through battered classics in the courtyard. I felt invisible, or worse, the punchline at family functions. One December I showed up at Christmas with a rough self-published book clutched in my damp palm. The cover was a splashy home-printed affair, Rio sketched in black lines against a yellow sun. The plot, a boy, a city, lost things found again. I passed out copies as gifts, folding hope into each one. "I wrote this," I said, voice trembling. Aunt Fatima read the back. "Fiction nay Benito pra sonha, but now you get a real job sim." They patted my back. The copies gathered dust by the door as the party wound down. Not one was opened. I left early, angry tears prickling my eyes as December's humid night pressed in. My mother tried quietly to encourage. "Maybe just write for yourself, querido." But I couldn't. I wanted them to see, to know. Rage propelled me. I carved out hours between graveyard shifts at the bus depot and dawn deliveries for a bakery. Stories poured out, gritty, honest, about ordinary cariocas holding on to hope between favelas and the sea. By my 20s, I'd sent manuscripts everywhere. New York, Sao Paulo, tiny presses in Vila Madalena, even digital contests for stories set in Brazil. Each silence meant a new room of self-doubt built inside me, but also, strangely, a growing serenity. If no one believed, that was their business. Mine was the work. 3 years after graduation, a publisher from Sao Paulo finally responded. Their email was barely 2 lines. "Liked your voice. Call us." I nearly threw my phone through the kitchen window when I read it. My knees shook. A week later, I traveled on borrowed money, slept at a friend's cramped apartment in Higienopolis, and signed a contract surrounded by strangers who cared only about the words, not the struggle. When the first novel came out, a slim blue paperback with my name spelled right, my family didn't really notice except for my mother, who held it like she might a new plant, tender and unsure what sunlight it needed, but it sold. Slowly, then all at once, the reviews were modest, sincere. One called it a portrait of Rio's soul. My bank account barely budged, but for the first time readers found me. Letters came in, mostly from teenagers, thanking me for reminding them that their city contained magic too. I wrote another book and another. A big magazine did a feature, the local bookshop hosted a signing. I sent invitations to my family, neighbors, old classmates. None came except my mother clutching her purse with both hands, eyes shining as she waited in line. I moved away for a while. Sao Paulo, then quick travels, Buenos Aires, sometimes Paris through a translation project. Each time I found cities missing something, Rio's haze at dawn, the tangle of Portuguese and laughter pouring through its streets. But nothing ever felt final, no matter how many stories I published. Memory is a drum that beats you back to where you started. I kept seeing the graduation stage in my dreams, fluorescent lights buzzing, Uncle Jorge laughing. Years later, a decade from that first bitter graduation night, a new invitation arrived, this time from my old secondary school. The principal wanted a former student of note to speak at their anniversary. The subject: resilience, chasing dreams, Rio de Janeiro. I didn't say yes right away. I thought about it for weeks, pacing my too-bright apartment in Nitri, staring at the skyline shivering between fog and sun. I knew some wounds had turned to scars, but others still smarted. A message from my mother tipped the scale. It would mean something for you and for them. So I went home. The drive along the bridge was choked with traffic, windows down, the radio playing samba from some bygone era. I rolled into the city's core, heart beating heavier with every familiar turn. Avenida Atlantica was still wild with beachgoers, the smell of salt and roasted peanuts in the air. The school gates, though now freshly painted, hadn't changed. I arrived early, clutching my notes, more for comfort than for reference. The gymnasium looked almost identical, down to the scuff marks on the floor. I had half an hour before the crowd arrived. I wandered through the halls, fingers trailing the scratched surfaces of lockers, memories crackling like static. People trickled in, students, teachers, some old faces I recognized from family, community, the people who had shaped my tangled relationship with this city. A hum settled, familiar but layered now with expectation. My mother sat near the front, her hair streaked more with grey, a small proud smile on her face. Next to her, Aunt Fatima, arms folded, Uncle Jorge looking less sure of himself now. And cousins who had grown into men but carried the same sly smirks. I found myself taking deep breaths to gather both restraint and courage. The anger was there, an old ember, but the years had softened its edges, replaced much with a calm resolve. They still didn't see me, not really, but they would. The event opened with introductions, some stiff jokes, polite anecdotes about school years. When my turn came, the principal called me forward. Dos nossos alunos mais talentosos, agora reconhecido como romancista Daniel Rocha. I stepped up. This time my voice was steady. I remember being on this stage for graduation, I began. I spoke of wild dreams of being a writer, a ripple of laughter, nervous, and I remember what came after, the doubt, the laughter, the feeling that what I wanted was something foolish. I don't blame anyone, because how could you believe in a thing you'd never seen? One teacher, Dona Mariana, smiled, nodding. I went on. My path wasn't easy. I worked jobs that seemed invisible, my stories piled up unread. My own family sometimes struggled to believe, yet through every night, every rejection I wrote, because stories were the only thing that made sense, because our city, its chaos, its beauty, deserved to be seen by the world. I paused, looking out. Uncle Jorge, once so quick to mock, sat uncomfortably rigid. Aunt Fatima stared at her shoes. I stand here not as someone who made it in spite of you. I stand here because even in rejection, in ridicule, I learned resilience. I learned to root my stories in real earth, not escapism, to remember people's struggles and joys. This city is why my books exist. They listened now, really listened. At the end, I was supposed to accept a plaque, a faded certificate, small gestures of recognition. Instead, as I stepped back, the principal gestured to the display arranged by the stage, a table covered in copies of my novels. But something more, students approached one by one holding worn, borrowed copies from the school library, annotated, dog-eared, clearly loved. A girl, maybe 16, said, "Your words made me believe I could tell my story, even when my brother said it was stupid." A boy spoke. "You wrote about my street, no one writes about Zona Naught," others chimed in. The auditorium shifted, a ripple of understanding, of pride. Teachers hugged me. The crowd, uncertain at first, began clapping for real. Across the room, I saw my family's faces, my cousins' expressions slack with the surprise of real success. I could see my uncle's mouth open, then clamp shut. He looked down, eyes wet, running a calloused hand over his jaw as if searching for words. Even Aunt Fatima, critical, hard-edged, looked at me with something like regret and a flicker of admiration. After the event, people pressed close, wanting to talk, to ask how. My mother wrapped her arms around my waist, pulled me tight. "Estu tau orgel hosa filho," her voice caught, broken with joy. I hugged her back, tears caught in my throat. Later that night we had a family dinner, everyone there gathered in the same backyard where they once teased me. The food Khan Farofa tasted of memories but knew sweetness too. Uncle Jorge raised his glass, throat rough. "Disculpa Danny nunca pense, vocia ircute motivo de orgulho." I nodded, anger cooling into a gentle peace. "Obrigado tio." No speech, no lecture, just the truth, finally acknowledged. After dessert, my cousins passed around a copy of my latest novel, asking for autographs. The same boys who once mocked, now wanting a piece of this thing I'd built from stubbornness and the city's bone-deep music. We shared stories through the night, family ones, city ones, the kind that never make it into the papers but shape the pulse of Rio. As I walked outside, barefoot in the sticky heat, the hum of traffic and music drifting in from distant Lapa, I let my eyes lift to the hills rising behind the city. The anger of youth had faded, replaced by serenity. My success wasn't a rebuke, it was a testament to dreaming stubbornly in the face of laughter, to writing, rewriting, sweating, bleeding each scene until people finally, truly saw. On that terrace, alone for a minute, I let myself feel it all. The old rejection, the years of struggle, the sudden rush of acceptance. It didn't erase everything that had come before, but it stitched a new layer into the city's quilt. And I knew, really knew, that coming home meant more than proving a point. It meant holding my story close and letting the city at last hold me in return.